I don't think it used to be expensive, but now it is.
Good for us,
Not so good
for
for
our
our
generation, but not so good for the kids.
It's a great way to build wealth.
$1 million. It's a big figure, right? Well, not anymore, because those $1 million properties are becoming our new norm. Welcome to Real Talk, realestate.com.au's property news podcast. It's real questions, real insights, and real answers. And today we're going to be talking about which suburbs around the country entered the $1 million club in 2023. We spoke to a couple of people on their thoughts about whether they would pay $1 million for a house.
Yes, I guess if I had it, then yes.
Probably to get what we want.
Of course, you kind of have to, right?
Well, we're lucky because we're a bit older.
Yep.
So I feel sorry for the younger guys that are coming through now because it's ridiculous.
It doesn't seem fair because my parents' generation and my generation have kind of surfed the wave of that wealth creation, and we haven't left anything behind for the generation that's coming through.
Joining me today to unpack it all is Anne Flaherty from PropTrack, who has a special interest in property price growth, and Danielle Utley from RealMark Real Estate, based in WA Northern Coastal Corridor, who had a few suburbs in her patch crack that $1 million club this year. Thank you both so much for joining me, because if there is one thing I love, it's a property that I absolutely can't afford. $1 million, it's becoming our new norm when it comes to housing prices around Australia. And I want to be clear, just for the listeners, we actually are talking about today houses. So it's not units, it's not apartments. And the $1 million club, kind of who's the most that's in it?
We see $1 million suburbs across every state in Australia. Unsurprisingly, the majority of these suburbs are based in the East Coast markets. So Sydney dominates the list when it comes to suburbs where you can get a house for $1 million or above. What we see is actually the median price of all homes in Sydney, whether it's units or houses, that combined median value is sitting above $1 million.
What percentage of suburbs around the whole of Australia, that includes capital cities and regions in every state, are over $1 million?
So about 20% of all suburbs nationally have a median price of 1 million or more. Now that's every suburb. So that includes your regional areas, your capital city areas. So 1 in 5 suburbs in the country, your median's now above 1 million.
How many newcomers hit the $1 million club in 2023, and where were they?
Well, last year we saw over 100 new suburbs. The majority of those were in New South Wales, where the median is already sitting above that level. Mm-hmm. But we actually saw new suburbs break into that club in every state. So we're continuing to see price growth, particularly in these more desirable areas. We're seeing very strong buyer demand, which is pushing those prices ever higher.
Danielle, Greater Perth features quite strongly on this list. There were 9 new suburbs that hit a median price of over $1 million in last year, 2023. So your patch in the Northern Coastal Corridor has 2 suburbs on that list. You've got Iluka sitting at $1,068,000 for median value, and that's a growth rate of 10.95% year on year. And then you have Burns Beach, which is sitting at $1,067,000, and that's a year-on-year growth of 9.79%. Are you surprised, Danielle, that these areas have joined the $1 million club?
Oh, not at all. These are 2 suburbs that have proven to be very, very popular over a very long period of time. And the people who set up the land packages in those areas were incredibly clever on how they set up that suburb. They created beautiful parklands, and the covenants were very strict to control the quality of housing there. So it became a very highly sought after state, even though it was, it's a good 30 k's from the city. For people to actually live away from the city in a suburb that is on the beach and is so green and has been maintained as well as it has, it's a natural choice for people in the northern suburbs to aspire to get into there.
Well, how rapid has the price growth been in those areas? How much did a house in Iluka and Burns Beach cost 10 years ago?
This is an interesting point, because if you look at the patterning of growth in Perth, I remember the 2003-2007 boom. That was fantastic. Prices doubled in that 3 to 4 year period in Iluka. Burns wasn't so much on the map at that point, but Iluka was. And it really brought attention to the area. Wealth is created through people's properties in this country. The great Australian dream is to own your own home. Whenever a suburb actually doubles in value, it gets a lot of attention. And during that boom period, that's what happened in Iluka. But then we had the GFC, 2008. I think that really hit WA in 2009. We had a little bit of leeway over here, more so than the eastern states. And the market came down between 2009 and 2014. We had a little peak in 2014, and then every quarter it came down between 2014 to 2019. So to be honest, I don't think the prices are hugely different between now and 10 years ago, because Perth has come down so much in that time that, to me, the rapid growth is almost a correction in the market. It's just happened so quickly that it's garnered national attention. But you have a look at our median. What are we, 640,000? Adelaide is 708,000. When have we been less than Adelaide? We're generally under Sydney, Melbourne. Brisbane is taking over because obviously the population growth in Queensland. But Perth is never at the bottom, and we've been at the bottom for quite some time. I think we're even under Hobart for a while there. So if you have a look at that, in my view, and when I look at those figures and I look at the growth that we've had over that time, this is just a very, very quick correction in the market. And we're drawing attention because the rental yields here are really good. People want to put their money somewhere. A lot of the investment that's been coming over here has been driving areas, particularly in the lower price suburbs. I think it's a correction.
Let's talk about the whole of WA, because obviously the Northern Coastal Corridor has seen a massive growth. What about the rest of the state?
Perth was actually the best performing capital city over 2023. And I think, one of the reasons for that is that we have seen prices there do a catch up. They did fall in the past and they are regaining that. I think another key factor when it comes to the Greater Perth area is that it was actually the area that saw the strongest population growth over the 12 months ending June 2023. So the population of WA increased by 3.1%, which created increased demand for housing. So it's not just the fact that, you see that interstate investors see it as a high value area to invest in, which also drives growth, but actually there's just more people in the state.
What changes have you noticed in the area over your 25 years kind of working there that you think are attributing to this price growth?
I think infrastructure, great quality homes, and there's a school there. So that area lacked a local school for a long period of time. And even though the area was so pretty and people were drawn there, they generally were families initially who had sort of older children. So maybe children who were already in high schools, who were established in private schools, you could live anywhere and still attend that school. Whereas what they've implemented now is in Burns Beach, a primary school. That holds families in an area. You put a school in there, and if you've got 3 children, you're not moving out until the last one gets through. No parent wants to change their child's school once it's settled. It's a really big deal to do that. So what's happening is that the stock is being held for longer in there. It's less speculative. In Iluka, they have put in a bit of an entertainment precinct. There's a restaurant and a pub there. There is a huge IGA, medical facilities. What I've found in the area with the way that it was structured, there is a variety of housing. Okay, so you don't just have your stock standard 4x2 for a family. You've got cottage blocks for first homeowners or downsizers, or even your great big mansions, which are now on the front overlooking the beach. So it takes the buyers through their entire homeowning life cycle, if you like. And I think that has held people in the area, and a lot of the demand for those areas come from local buyers. They're people who upsize and downsize in the area. So that generates a lot of demand in those suburbs. When you've got very strong local demand competing with people trying to get into the area, it's going to hold those values really well.
And can you give us a bit of an economical take on the same question? I'd really love a brief overview on the contributing factors to that price growth from a national perspective.
What we've seen nationally is that we have a growing population. We had, a period where interest rates were incredibly low during 2020, 2021, where that drove up property prices very dramatically. We've certainly seen a real catch-up as a result of that. Now we've entered a different phase. Interest rates are very high, yet we are continuing to see property prices rise at a broad national level and, grow very rapidly in markets such as Perth and Adelaide. And, Brisbane as well is another one that's seeing very strong growth. Ultimately, it comes down to where people are moving. People need somewhere to live, and they, even in an environment where interest rates are very high, they realise that with relatively limited stock on the market, they need to offer competitive prices if they want to be successful in bidding for a property. So that's one of the reasons why we have seen prices continue to rise. even against a backdrop of higher interest rates.
That leads me to Sydney. So, as a rough percentage, how many suburbs are under $1 million in median price?
When it comes to house prices in Greater Sydney, only 30% of suburbs actually have a median below 1 million. So in 70% of suburbs, people are having to fork out 1 million or upwards of that just to purchase a house.
Do you know, like that 30% that's under $1 million, do you know how that compares to decades past?
We're going to see a lower and lower percent of suburbs across Greater Sydney in that under $1 million level. Demand there has driven property prices very high. It is by far the most expensive market in Australia to buy. And what we're seeing is that pockets of Sydney that were traditionally more affordable are now becoming less so. There's been a reset. For example, people who live in Greater Sydney have a different price point of what they see as normal when it comes to purchasing a home. And so those more affordable areas further away from the Sydney CBD, they have started to see, prices rise very dramatically as well over the past few years. There's fewer and fewer pockets of affordability left in Greater Sydney.
So if majority of the property in Greater Sydney, 70% of those suburbs sit in that $1 million club, is that simply because it's such a popular city for immigration or business, or are there other factors that are driving up that price?
I think that Sydney is definitely a really desirable city to live in globally. It's always attracted a high level of migration, not just from people overseas, but we also see people move into Sydney from interstate within Australia. We're actually also, though, seeing the reverse trend where a lot of younger people who are looking to buy a home, they actually can't even afford to buy there. So we actually see quite a lot of young people move from the Greater Sydney area into places like Brisbane and Melbourne, which, it's actually not great news for Sydney because it means that they're losing, a share of that younger workforce. So there are actually a lot of implications that come from a lack of affordability in a city. But the reality is that if you own a home in Sydney and you have no mortgage, maybe you bought 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, you're sitting in a really strong position. And that means that for those people, if they are to sell up and buy a new home, they don't really have to deal with that struggle of pulling together a deposit, dealing with a really large mortgage.
I want to know, what about the other capital cities? Where's most affordable?
Most affordable city in the country is Darwin at the moment. The median price of a home there is sitting below $500,000. Perth is in second place. So the median price of a home across the Greater Perth area is sitting at around $630,000. We then have Hobart and Adelaide. And then, of course, the three most expensive cities would be Sydney with a median of 1.1 million. That's houses and units combined. And then Melbourne, the median sitting at about 800, and then Brisbane is around 780. There's a really big divergence in how much you have to pay to purchase in all of those cities.
In regional Australia, where are we starting to see that median price point reach $1 million?
In the regional markets, it's those areas that tend to be, within 1 to 2 hours from a capital city or a large hub. They're also areas that are very popular with people looking for a good lifestyle. So we are actually seeing regional areas across the country hit that $1 million mark. Of course, unsurprisingly, it's those East Coast regional areas that dominate the list. So if we think about, areas in New South Wales, well, we have quite a few. Pretty much every regional area in New South Wales has seen a significant jump in the number of suburbs entering that $1 million club. The Illawarra region, the Shoalhaven region, has seen a lot of suburbs enter that level. In Queensland, it's really your Gold and Sunshine Coasts where we're seeing, very highly priced regional property. And then in Melbourne, it's more your Mornington Peninsula, your coastal suburbs, your Geelong region that have seen a big jump in those suburbs entering the $1 million club.
Danielle, how are people on the ground in your patch in WA? How do you think they're feeling about the increasing housing prices?
If you own, you have the asset behind you, you've got equity built up in that property, and you can basically move up and down within that same suburb. So there's no issue there. What I have noticed is a large dropout, if you like, from people in the lower price suburbs moving into the area. So, one of the things about Perth being the development being so linear is that there are these main roads that divide the coastal side from the non-coastal side. And you can be 100 metres on the non-coastal side compared to 100 metres on the coastal side. And there is a $200,000 difference in the price of those homes. So, you know, and you can just get out of your house and walk across the road and be over there, and that's $200,000.
That would be like the most expensive walk anyone's ever taken.
Very much so. So, you know, in terms of people coming over from maybe the lower price suburbs getting in there, I'm seeing a little bit less of that just because that gap is widening and they're falling back into maybe the periphery areas. There's huge disappointment in that. But also, if they are managing to get into the areas, there are big compromises. So what they had on their tick list when they first started looking, that has changed significantly in terms of what they're accepting. They are compromising to get in.
We did speak to somebody about how they're feeling about their potential of home ownership and $1 million club and rising prices. So let's hear what they had to say.
I don't have $1 million. Brisbane would be cheaper than Melbourne and Sydney. I live in Manifold Heights. I don't think it used to be expensive, but now it is. But I think I haven't thought about it yet because it's so expensive.
I actually find that really interesting, her saying it's really expensive, so I haven't thought about it. It's almost like people actually aren't even bothering to consider that it's still within reach, which I think is not the case, and I think it's a bit sad. But Anne, what is the antidote to price increases, if there even is one?
Ultimately, the antidote to higher prices is more housing. We're not building enough new housing to support and house, our existing population and our growing population. And until that happens, we're going to continue to see more competition for every property that becomes available.
I feel like I could be a bit off here, but in total black and white terms, it sounds like to me supply and demand.
It's pretty basic.
Literally.
It's very basic. Look, if there aren't enough homes, people have to pay more for the homes that are available. So increasing the number of homes, we know that this happens where we see areas where there is a higher volume of new housing built. The speed at which prices and rents rise slows down.
Danielle, in a couple of sentences, do you have any advice for homeowners looking to get into these suburbs?
Don't try and jump the whole ladder. Take one rung at a time, get in, make the sacrifices, pay as much of your mortgage down as you can and build your equity so that you've got a stepping stone into the area. We're very much living in a now society. I want everything now. But with housing, it's a big risk to take to try and get everything now. You need to work within your parameters and within your budgets.
So it's almost like be more practical rather than be idyllic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, look, I feel like we could keep talking about rising property prices for hours, but that is all we have time for today. And thanks so much for your awesome insights on the $1 Million Club, and Danielle, as well as your insights into WA Northern Coastal Corridor specifically. I've been a little bit blown away by these stats today, some I was a little bit unaware of. So hopefully it's been valuable to our listeners as well. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining me. This has been Real Talk. For your weekly fix, please follow wherever you listen to your podcasts and tune in next time for more real questions, news and insights on the topics that matter most from realestate.com.au, Australia's #1 address in property. All information provided is general advice and opinion based on current market conditions. These opinions should not be treated as investment advice. Always obtain advice based on your individual circumstances.
Real Talk acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, air and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present.